This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the great Buck Melton. Dr. Buck Melton, it's great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
We've discussed your political issues, but I'll let that go tonight. We generally sail the ship into legal arrangements or legal questions, and tonight maybe we can talk about my world, which is medicine. And what I'll do is I'll let you be the questionnaire. You can question me a little bit about that, and I think we want to discuss how to make the American healthcare system better.
All right.
And you may now ask me that question.
How do we make it better? Well, first of all, for those of us who are not as familiar with Dr. Robinson's background, he really is, I think, one of Georgia's premier neurosurgeons and has his hand in a lot of different pies and has done a great deal to make medical practice in the medical community in Middle Georgia much better than it otherwise would have been. And so with that basic background, I'll ask, as you are approaching senior status
Yes.
here, what do you see some of the biggest problems being in, and I'll let you decide, healthcare in general in the United States or in Georgia or in Middle Georgia, and how would you like to go about addressing them?
Well, you know, it's a really complicated question, isn't it? So I would say that one of the things that's happened with healthcare is just such these extraordinary improvements that have taken place. It really is unbelievable what's happened in my experience. And it's happened in the United States. It's the leader in the world. Great things have occurred. It's just amazing. And they continue to occur. And the question is, how can we harvest the advantages that are occurring every day? How can we increase those advantages and get them to everyone in a satisfactory fashion? And I would say there are lots and lots of things that make that process difficult. Probably if I can quote Pogo, we've seen the enemy and it's us.
And he is us.
And probably the biggest thing out there, I think, is are the American people and their quest for better health. And so many people fall through the cracks in regards to their personal responsibility. So people eat too much, they drink too much, they don't take their medicine. Then that's a really substantial problem. I think particularly morbid obesity. You can really live a long time if you stay thin. You've got a big chance of doing that. So I think that would be a big thing. The next thing is just access to health care. And a lot of the encumbrances that stop access are financially driven. So you could imagine a system where there was an investment in making sure people had appropriate access. Now that's a complicated word, and it also requires some sense of personal obligation. So if you I better go in for my checkup. So I've got the ability to do that. I should do that. I should pay attention to different parameters with the doctor's suggestions.
Now, if I could interrupt right here, because I think you're taking us in an interesting direction. I think if you ask the average patient who may be having some health problems about his experience of the healthcare system, he's going to say, "Oh, it's so hard to make an appointment. It's so hard to figure out the insurance. It's so hard to do the paperwork. The doctor only spends 5 minutes with me." And I'm hearing here from the doctor that the problem is with the patient. He eats too much, drinks too much. How much of this behavior is programmed by our own brains? For instance, now that we live in the land of plenty here, and we can't,
that's right.
Yeah.
It's a substantial, and I didn't mean to demean my fellow humans. But I'm a patient too. Everyone's a patient at some point in their life. I see a huge advantage that could take place with more personal health responsibilities. And the system needs to make sure people have an open door to get what health they need. The story is about what causes aberrant behavior that's unhealthy. Well, I think a lot of it is hardwired, it's programmed. So, for instance, I made the comment about obesity, morbid obesity. Well, if you're in a state of nature, you're on the Eurasian steppes, and you haven't eaten in 4 days, and you come upon let's see, a dead mammoth, and you just chow down and you just eat, just gorge yourself. That's just a normal response to stay alive. So there are different centers in the brain that govern this, and they're tilted toward eating. If people, if the predisposition was not to eat, it was everyone was skin and bones. That was the normal deal. That would be the species wouldn't survive. Mm-hmm. So it's obviously hardwired, programmed. Another thing about the way we're programmed is that the way that Darwinian dynamics works is that anything that's going to cause you to successfully reproduce and look after your children is put in your genetic structure, and if it's not there, your genetic structure will be eliminated. So pretty much, if you can stay healthy and you're reproductively okay, and until say you're 30 or 35, those things are pretty well put together. But then after that, all kinds of diseases start to afflict one, just because this Darwinian I guess acid bath that we go through, our genes go through to purge us for anything that's going to not make us reproductively successful. Then after you're 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, all that's gone, and you're suspect to all kinds of penalties. And you could just continue on the subject. The different kinds of defects that people have are referable to a lot of the rush toward this Darwinian acid bath, turning out better species, doing it quickly. So our brains have gotten very big, and when our brains get big, the female, the diameter of the pelvis, they can't handle these large children coming out. The brains have expanded too quickly. So in a state of nature, some percentage, maybe 5% of ladies die in childbirth. We have all those things out there that are hardwired in us. We have issues with glucose, with sugar metabolism. That goes out. We have problems with our upright posture. So we have too much stress on the vertebral column. We're not wired to stand erect for 40 or 50 or 80 years. The vertebral column goes out. We have a host of issues that are hardwired in us, including aberrant behavior. So people like to, experiment with drugs. They like to get drunk. They like to fight sometimes, depending on circumstances. They like to, reckless behavior is not uncommon. So all those things we just have to deal with. And the idea is making our journey through the world as safe and as good as we can make it. And that's what the healthcare community would like to do.
So can we do that through public policy? If our behavior now is not really suitable to the modern environment in which we find ourselves, for instance, we still act as if food is scarce when it really isn't, and we become morbidly obese, to take your earlier example. If people really cannot govern themselves, should it be a part of healthcare policy and public policy somehow to penalize that bad behavior?
Good question. We've had discussions earlier about liberty, freedom, whatever. Do I have dare I eat a peach? Is that T.S. Eliot? I guess.
Do I dare to eat a peach?
Do I dare to eat a peach?
I can't remember exactly.
Dare I eat a peach? I think that's, in other words, it's T.S. Eliot. I think. Is that
it is Eliot, yes.
It's
Prufrock.
J.F. for Prufrock.
Prufrock.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
But in any event, the story is there are limits. Should you limit your behavior? What should you, for your own health purposes, should the state enforce that? Should the state, for instance, make it very difficult for you to smoke, which
Yes.
they've done?
Yes.
They say, I guess people that like to smoke cigarettes or tobacco, I'm assuming it's a great pleasure, but the state has said, well, we're going to just not let that happen, and we're going to add a substantial amount of time to your life, though from an actuarial point of view, it could be in the state's interest to let you smoke because you could die at an early age, relatively early one, and you would
and you don't
contribute.
Have to shell out those benefits.
You'll have a quick end, so you have lung cancer, you'll die. Well, not always, but the state might say smoking is good. If you can productively do something, we don't want you to hang out for 30 years and use resources, which is kind of what's happening in a way. So should the state forbid aberrant behavior that might injure people? Well, I think that could be an appropriate thing. Certainly warnings, food warnings sound pretty good. The idea that I think it's quite good to say, if you go to Burger Chef or whatever the local hamburger emporium is, no offense, but the Big Mac has, I don't know, 1,800 calories in it. Or
heart attack on a
plate.
Plate.
Well, at least you know you're eating 1,800 calories, and that's a good thing. I think it's reasonable to take substantial steps in that direction, and there are warnings on. I'm really in favor of that. The smallest thing the state could do is just make you aware of what things could or could not happen. Also, if in fact the people are saying, well, we know people are going to indulge in risky behavior on the road, or that's just part of the hardwire there, you presumably could construct cars that are very, very safe, and that maybe it won't go over 90 miles an hour or something. Yes, I mean, you could do something like that.
Yes, but the cost of that to develop the perfectly safe automobile. If you were in charge, if we elected you, how far would you go? I mean, how libertarian would you be versus?
Well, one of the things is it's so complicated to be a political decision maker. It's very, very complicated, and I think we see that. The world is so extraordinarily interconnected, and there are all these feedback mechanisms that exist. There are all these counterintuitive things that happen. So you could say, well, I'm just going to have cars that don't go over 90 miles an hour. And then the impulse for speed might find itself some other way. Well, I'll jump off mountaintops, or I'll do the thrill of driving quickly. I'll drive motorcycles, or these aggressive impulses will go somewhere else, or maybe to war, for instance. Maybe that's going to make people want to fight more. But you can't understand all the issues that are out there. So in general, I think political leaders should take advice a lot, and they should understand numbers. So and the impacts of their policy, they should understand that. And I would say one of the things that would need to happen would be to have a global viewpoint. I mean, we might have some discussions about that, but because from a public health point of view, there's all these interconnections. We have Ebola can flip in from wherever. The Chinese are, I don't know, they have these, if you've been to China, the pollution is just absolutely extraordinary. And the air currents take that pollution, they sweep it toward us, so we have these issues.
Everyone lives downstream.
The fish, yes, the overfish the sea, we have these huge population increases. These enormous population increases, they sort of, you could call America a life raft. I mean, it's this place where there are lots and lots of good things for our species exist here. We're in a life raft in a way, and the rest of the world could swamp the life raft. So I think you have to really look at a global perspective. That would be the most important thing to do, I think, in regards to health and the general welfare of the species.
Once again, if you were in charge, or you're the top medical or scientific advisor to the president or Congress, are you going to look globally, or are you more concerned with America? Are you concerned with Middle Georgia? And obviously, there are a lot of value judgments you've got to make.
Well,
here
it's a balance. It's a
decision.
balance. So obviously, you have a hierarchy of concerns, and and the first concern is reasonable, and that's the way humans are. They go for their kith and kin first, and then they're the communities, then they're communities and communities. And the issue that from an ethical point of view, that overcoming that turns out to be a big deal. So if you can look at a lot of of Christianity or major world religions, the instinctive desire to sort of propagate or look after your people that look like you or your neighbors, that's hardwired. You have to understand. I would do that, but you also have to have a balance that you have to worry about everyone. And that's a big deal. particularly as the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I can well remember being a boy and saying, well, I don't know what the year is, 1955, and the idea is Canada is some enormous distance away. Everybody, I mean, if you're in Macon and you go, Atlanta's a big way, and a person from another country would be a really exotic person, or people that had gone anywhere would be a big deal. And I think there were the jokes around about how insular the culture was.
Yes.
Well, it's not that way anymore. So everybody is moving around. Stuff is happening. If you go to Walmart, the prices are low because China's producing whatever they are, 1.3 billion people there. The interconnections of the world and the changes that's causing means that an intelligent leader has to take that into consideration and understand what the world is going to be like in 50 years, not the way it was 50 years ago, if I could phrase it that way. So I think I would. Those are general questions, but that would be the way I might play the game.
So you seem to, you're recognizing that it's a complicated problem and that there are many, many issues, but I'm not hearing answers. If you had,
that's the first trick of a good politician. So
yes.
I'm pretending I have that position. So obviously, which is what politicians do or don't do, they're very circumspect about stating opinions. Just because once they've stated that, it becomes very difficult to retract it.
Of course.
As I think George W. the First said, "Read my lips, no new taxes."
Yes, and then
once he said that, that was it. So if you listen to political figures, they're often very, I want the best for our American people. They might say that. I want low taxes and the best for the American people.
Yes. But you've got an advantage here because we are armchair quarterbacking.
Yeah,
this.
it makes it a lot easier.
So I would say one of my old deans gave me this exercise. Give me 3 things that you're going to do. 3 specific things. If you had your choice of anything, policy or technology or budget,
what were the 3 things
that would improve healthcare?
Well, improving healthcare. Let's see. Tick, 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 tick.
They don't have to be in order. Just
well, I think I think just making sure that people understand. They understand it as best they can.
Education.
Good and bad health habits.
Okay, education.
That is probably the biggest thing I would do. So, okay, you understand if what's good for you, and then secondly, I would try and I would have the state promote efforts at good health care. I like bikes. Ride bikes are good. I like the in Amsterdam, you're just overwhelmed with people on bikes. Let's do that. Let's encourage exercise.
How much to encourage? And I don't want to get away. We still have a third point there.
Yeah, right.
But how many teeth do you want to put into that encouragement?
Well, I think everybody could have a Fitbit at state expense. That sounds reasonable. I mean, you could look at you could understand your caloric input and output, and you could say, well, we're going to put some money into softball leagues. And I also think that one of the big things would be both genders should be encouraged to physical activity. I think that's an issue. Often the ladies, their cultural arrangements mean it difficult for them to exercise appropriately, and that would be a good thing to do. So I would encourage knowledge of health care, and I would allow the state to pursue healthy exercise arrangements. Maybe the third thing I might do, I'm naming things, would be I would be on the lookout for expropriating or at least encouraging healthcare advances around the world. So, and I think that's something that could happen. You could say, okay, let's put a worldwide cancer consortium together. So we've got 8 billion people on the planet. Right now, and the amount of resources that go into different kinds of research, there's not a lot of money that does it. And another thing that happens is that often drug companies have a mercantile interest in doing that. I mean, I don't say that's bad, but it's in something so primordial as cancer research, putting some kind of huge plan together, kind of like the atomic bomb project. So you could say, all right, I'm going to have an atomic bomb project to cure cancer, and I've got 8 billion people here, and I'm going to invest, Well, let's start out with $1.5 trillion. And I think the gross, I'm making these numbers up, I think an external person that came there that wanted to buy the Earth, if you're circling the Earth in a flying saucer and you ask how much is that little green dot down, how much can I buy it for? I think the gross value of the Earth is, I mean, there's a number out there, something like 500 trillion.
Okay.
So the whole planet's worth 500 trillion, and I think it produces more or less about 100 trillion a year in the world's GNP.
That's a pretty good return.
Yeah, so I'm going to take a pretty good hunk of it, and I would take this 1.5 trillion a year to cure cancer, and I believe I would take it from the human indulgences that are out there. So.
Sumptuary laws, as I mentioned earlier.
Well,
yes.
I take the 1 point, and one of those indulgences is war. So that's a little indulgence that happens.
That's going to be a hard one to restrict. Now you keep coming back to cancer, and I don't know if you're using that as just an example or not.
I am.
What about cancer seems to have always been with us, but it seems to be a much more acute problem that's heading toward us like a freight train. Would be antibiotics. That seems to me like a bigger immediate problem than cancer.
Well,
then on the other side of things, I'd say aging. But
they're interconnected. So I would say if there's a big interconnection between stem cells, curing cancer. The problem we have is that we're use a consortium of, I don't know how many billion cells we have. Well, we have a lot. We must have maybe 1 trillion. I don't know. There are 80 billion, is that right? There are 80 billion in the cells, right? We have some enormous number of cells. They all are like in an orchestra. One of the little cells plays the violin, it happens. And if you can basically understand when that happens and prevent it, and then you can also replace aberrant cells with stem cells, and you can really get into aging issues, and so you could enormously extend the human life expectancy. You enter all kinds of complicated philosophical issues in doing that. But that seems to be, that would be one of the blessings that curing cancer would happen, is that you would understand a lot about the aging process. The two have an interconnection. Now we'll flip now the subject to the antibiotics, and the idea is that we live in a microbial sea. So there's a lot of egotism in our species that, we're in this room, we're breathing the air, well, we're the only big creatures here, but there are millions and billions of little microbes that have been here at least since Precambrian times, more. I mean, maybe a billion years seems to be a number I toss around. A billion years, maybe. That's probably right. The microbes have been here about a billion, and they mutate very quickly. So what we try and do is we knock these little devils off with different kinds of arrangements, and they reproduce so quickly. The cells that have some kind of they're not impacted by the antibiotics. The mutation is happening at an enormous rate. Every 30 minutes, there's a new microbe there. Trillions of reproductive process. So they quickly mutate, and they become
a lot of this is also due to the fact that in large farming industries that we're pumping antibiotics into healthy animals, and therefore encouraging the resistance.
Yes. So there's a lot of balance, and we share our bodies with these microbes. There's a couple of pounds of microbes in your body as you're walking around that you have a symbiotic relationship.
Is that a hard figure, around 2 pounds?
That's a good one.
Okay, good.
It's a surprising number. I mean, it's more than you.
I'd once heard a statistic, and I can't tell you where it came from. It's on the internet, so it must be true. But for every human being, there are roughly 300 pounds of insects. So
we certainly share the planet, and we do it right. And so we have to be cautious. We're sort of, the life on the Earth is sort of like a pond scum on a rock a pond scum on a rock in a pond. So little green little deals on this little rock that's floating around out there, and we have to be very cautious that we don't do anything that jeopardizes the arrangement, which we easily could. And if you look at the way civilizations collapse, often that's the case, which is another thing, if I'm the world leader here.
You are?
I think a study of failed civilizations is an extremely important thing as to why.
Wow, history? Amazing.
Well, at applied distance. I don't want to be too taxing. But the idea of why things haven't worked, I think, is really important, and that needs to be surfaced. We need to come up with that. So let's say we're going to have some kind of a run-in with China, and we have to figure out, well, let's go back to the Peloponnesian Wars. Let's just see Athens and Sparta, how they handle that. And
not very well.
No, they didn't.
Well
they
at
did
all.
not. No, we didn't. And the issue is, you certainly could easily get mass extinctions with the conflicts that are possible. So I guess what I would do is I would really, I think I would push a lot of interchange with all the other players, and that happened after World War. II. To Franklin Roosevelt's credit, I mean, many people think, well, maybe he's, I don't know, not as exalted as he might have been in the past, but one of the big things, and Winston Churchill. Those guys really wanted to push their Atlantic Charter, clicked that in, and that's one of the ideas is the moralistic viewpoint of let's not have these conflicts, and the European community came out of that. And so there's a debate about how well people get along, but that is a central obligation of any political leader is never to have any kind of conflict. Never, never, never have any kind of conflict. And then how are you going, the question comes up, which we're slightly off health, is how do you handle the world situation where there are bad people out there? What are you going to do about it? And it turns out that you are going to have to get some kind of enforcement about really bad people. And right now, I don't think it is too hard. For political points of view, I think you could probably control nation states pretty well. Nation states, the issue that you get into are fundamental religious and ethical differences. So that turns out to be a big deal, as to how you're going to handle that. And I think one of the important things to do would be to have some kind of important religious relationships encouraging that, and as much as possible. We had just sort of en passant conversations about Jerusalem, the Middle East, whatever. Certainly, it's I think understanding those differences and trying to patch them up turns out to be a big thing here.
That's going to be a tough one, and I don't think we can solve it in the few remaining seconds that we've got.
It's the responsibility of theologians.
Yes.
So maybe I would have a White House theologian to be able to I think that would be a pretty good thing. And because if you look at the threat to the species and ergo health, I mean, it appears that there are these huge cataclysmic possibilities that exist, religious wars, which has always been the case. I mean, that's the most violent, the worst possible human conflicts.
I would say, and we've got to wrap it up here, it's actually not religion, it's nationalism. A wonderful book called The Statistics of Deadly Quarrels. But we'd have to save that for another time because we're out of time for tonight.
We're out of time. Well, okay. That was good, Bucky. Okay, maybe I'll have to straighten you up some more at another point. Okay,
thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves. Endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.